Linked offset in Inkscape can be used for a lot of different style designs. It can create a shadow effect to text. It can also be used for knockout to create the illusion of an outlined bubble around the inner smaller text, which overlays a large text item, such as the example here that I made for my sister for her wedding. I'm just going to go over the main steps that you would use to create the offset, and from there you can bring it into Design Space and continue with the rest of the portions of slicing it out from the background text and such. So you just want to grab the text tool here along the left side ribbon. You want to create a text box and just type, most people do a name, and most people use the font called I Love Glitter for this. It's a very popular one. We will just be using a standard font for this. Don't have to go and download anything special. You can do this with any font that you already have or that is installed on the computer by default. So we'll type in here. And as soon as you're done typing, you can do it one of two ways. You can select the font and choose your size. But then you have to adjust your text box to match the size of the font. So what I personally like to do is click out, go to the selection tool here, hold the Control button, and choose the right corner arrow and enlarge it. So that will actually take this text size up on its own. If you double click, you'll see the exact size up here that it became. You want to make sure that your text is selected with the selection tool when you do these next steps. So you want to go to Path, Object to Path, and then you'll want to make sure to go to Object, Ungroup. That will individualize the letters, and you can make changes such as spacing or possibly sizes of individual letters if you wanted. In this example, I could make each of the first letters that are capitalized, I could make them a lot larger than the rest if I wanted to really bring that out. It's really up to you. So from here, these letters are now kind of yours to manipulate, and you can tell that they are because of the dotted boxes around each letter. You want to go to Path, Union. That's the same equivalent in Design Space as welding. In Inkscape, it now sees it as an object. And the way that you can know that it has been converted completely and not text anymore is to double click and you'll see all the nodes instead of seeing the blinking cursor for typing. That means that Inkscape is now seeing this as an object. So that's what you want. That is what allows you to be able to do any kind of shadowing ability. So now that this is seen as a full object in Inkscape, we can go to Path, Linked Offset. It'll create a small diamond somewhere along the object that you're working with. It's in different places on different items, so you just have to look for it. It looks very similar to the nodes, but slightly different because it's individual and it's on its own, and it's usually found at the top. So you'll know that that's the right one when you can click it and you drag it and it creates super borders on your items. The first thing I do after I've adjusted that a little bit is I change the color to something that's very different so that I can see what I'm doing. So while you're here with this option, you can actually make it as large or as thin as you like. Typically, kind of like to have a nice border, so it kind of bubbles around each letter, and if you were to use it as an underlayer of vinyl, you'd have a nice contrast of the topmost layer of text versus the color behind. So I think that looks pretty nice. So just like the text, you'll need to turn this into an object that Inkscape can recognize. So you'll need to go to Path, Object to Path. When you do that, the first thing you'll notice is there's a bunch of extra nodes in here, and those would be where there are gaps. So if you left the border a little smaller, you'd have gaps, say, between like the A's and the E's, things like that. So if you don't want any of that, and you just want it to be a complete shaded edge with no gaps anywhere, you'll want to go to Path, Break Apart. And it doesn't look like it did anything, but what it's doing is it's getting rid of those gaps. So when you go to Path, Union, they're gone, and you just have a nice solid background. So if you're just looking to do a normal offset, that's totally fine too, and I can show you the difference that it would be with that. But for me, practice makes perfect, so I'm going to go ahead and just create everything from the very first step, and we've created some text here, sized it up. So now we're going to have to turn that into an object. So we go to Path, Object to Path, Object, Ungroup, Path, Union. And now we're going to create the offset. So while your text is selected, go back to Path, Link to Offset. You'll see the little node appear. And you can choose to change the color before or after you move it. Totally up to you. So let's see, we'll do one with some noticeable gaps there, just a tiny border. So this will be with no filling in at all. It'll just be a standard shadowed background that you can use that defines letters, doesn't fill in any of the extra holes. So that looks pretty good. We'll go to Path, Object to Path, and then you'll want to go to Object, Ungroup, which won't make any difference here, but it's typically just the best route that I've found that keeps it in the correct format for Design Space to see it. So then you can go to Path, Union. So now you'll have a background that is slightly bigger than your text with the according spaces in the letters that you might have, such as A, E, O. This is without any gap fill. It's kind of good to just play around and use either one and see what works best for the project you're doing at the time. Good luck! And as always, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. I am definitely available as much as possible, usually crafting pretty late into the evening, so feel free to reach out to me and I'll do my best to help you out. Happy crafting!